All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Timothy Bradford. I'm one of the co-directors of the Mark Allen Everett Poetry Series, and I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Long before the University of Oklahoma was established, the land on which the university now resides was the traditional home of the Caddo Nation and Wichita and affiliated tribes. We acknowledge this territory once also served as a hunting ground, trade exchange, and migration route for the Apache, Comanche, Kiowa, and Osage nations. Today, 39 tribal nations dwell in the state of Oklahoma as a result of settler and colonial policies that were designed to assimilate Native people. We acknowledge, honor, and respect the diverse indigenous peoples connected to this land. We fully recognize, support, and advocate for the sovereign rights of all of Oklahoma's 39 tribal nations. The Mark Allen Everett Poetry Series in its current iteration was co-founded in 2007 by Jonathan Stalling and Nancy Yock, who's with us here today. Currently, it's run by Jonathan Stalling, Craig Hill, Todd Fuller, Sarah Wilson, and myself, and sponsored by the Everett Family Fund, the OU College of Arts and Science, and the OU College of International Studies. And our goal is to connect readers to contemporary poetry and poetics by giving students and residents alike an opportunity to listen to and speak with poets from all over the United States and beyond. So today we're honored to have with us Arthur Malcolm Dixon, managing editor of Latin American Literature Today, and Juan J. Morales, currently the professor and department chair of English and World Languages at Colorado State University, Pueblo. I'm going to do a quick intro for both of these guests, and then I'll turn it over to Arthur and he'll start the interview. So Arthur Malcolm Dixon is a translator, editor, interpreter, and occasional writer from Ardmore, Oklahoma. Earned his BA in History and Spanish from the University of Oklahoma, followed by an MA in Spanish from the same university. He is currently co-founder and managing editor of Latin American Literature Today, an online multilingual literary journal affiliated with World Literature Today, and dedicated to publishing the work of Latin American authors. He's done a tremendous amount of translation work and published a lot of that in a lot of great journals and anthologies. And he is currently a Tulsa Artist Fellow entering his second year, where he's actively working as a community interpreter and facilitating communication for Spanish speakers in jails, courtrooms, schools, and hospitals throughout the area. And I think he'll talk some about that during this dialogue/interview. He's currently working on new issues of Latin American Literature Today and a number of other translation projects, as well as a collection of his own bilingual writing. So welcome, Arthur Malcolm Dixon. And Juan J. Morales is the son of an Ecuadorian mother and Puerto Rican father. He's also the author of 3 collections of poetry, Friday and the Year That Followed, The Siren World, and his latest collection, the 2019 Handyman, The Handyman's Guide to End Times, winner of, sorry, it wasn't published in 2019, it was published in 2018, winner of the 2019 International Latino Book Award. He's published in all sorts of great journals, and he is a Canto Mundo Fellow, a Macondo Fellow, the editor-publisher of Pilgrimage Press, and professor and department chair of English and World Languages at Colorado State University, Pueblo. So, welcome, both of you. And Arthur, I'll turn it over to you and let you lead the interview.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tim, for those kind introductions. As Tim said, my name is Arthur Malcolm Dixon. I'm a translator, editor on the Tulsa Artist Fellowship. So coming to you from the Muskogee Creek Reservation here in Tulsa. And it's a very great pleasure for me to be back virtually at OU, where I spent many years, and to be having this conversation with a fantastic poet, Juan J. Morales. First, I'd just like to say again, nice to meet you, Juan. This is the first time that we've met where you're witnessing a live meeting on Zoom for the first time. And I thought it would be interesting to start on a somewhat postmodern note, taking apart the format a little bit. We were just talking before we got started about this new world of doing literature, doing poetry through Zoom, through Mark Allen Everett poetry series. So I'm interested to ask first how you've found that, what the pros and cons have been, perhaps, of this new world of sharing our work through screens rather than in person.
That's a great question to start with, and it's great to meet you in the world virtually as well, Arthur. It was funny because when Handyman came out, I had I was starting to get a lot of gigs, and I was starting to like travel a lot more. Like, for example, I got to go to the Oklahoma Book Festival just a few several months before the pandemic, and that's where I met Tim. And it was kind of a lot of road tripping adventures, and then it kind of came to a screeching halt. And like in our household, we had like 8 trips canceled for 2020, and that included international travel and such. And so but I think literature today and creative writers today are always innovative and flexible. So the standstill didn't really last very long, because a few weeks later, people were kind of just doing these like, jump on the Zoom call, let's share poetry, let's gig, and everyone pretty mobilized pretty fast. And like, for example, terrain.org is a great environmental literary magazine, and they're doing like a monthly series on Zoom, and they get phenomenal attendance. So I think people are kind of adapting, and I think the thing that we have to kind of be careful about is continuing to stay safe, healthy, and so forth, but also to make sure we're also like using this technology to our advantage and opportunities, because but it also, I also think of it as kind of like a privilege, because I always think, like as a professor and as someone in a community, the community with so many people in the rural parts, internet is a privilege, but it should be a right. It should be a right, so people can partake in these cultural exchanges.
Totally. Yeah, we've found as well with Latin American literature today that this new kind of world of video communication and stuff is good for accessibility in some ways, but as you say, not accessible enough, I think. So that's an interesting point. Interesting also to hear that your kind of activities surrounding the Handyman's Guide to End Times were cut short in the way they were. I'm sure that this is a question that you get all the time.
Yeah.
But it comes to mind for very obvious reasons. How has it been kind of promoting and talking about this book with a dystopian edge to it in the midst of a time of such crisis, of such change in the world?
I can't speak to it as strongly as like people that have had books published during the pandemic, like the books, because they've had to rely on a lot of different creative ways to celebrate a book. For example, the poet Gary Jackson, he's a friend of mine and a fellow poet with University of New Mexico Press. His book just came out, and they did like an intimate opening in Charleston, South Carolina, in a great local bookstore. And I'm hoping the virtual presence allows them to kind of gain momentum there as well. So it's clearly challenging, but it's also for personally, with the title of this book, some people have kind of joked with me like, oh, it's a real shame that this book didn't come out in 2020. And I'm just kind of like, sorry, it was too early by 2 years, but
yeah. No, I think it's almost a cliche at this point, people saying kind of, oh, this book is perfect for the pandemic times, right? Thinking that not just with your book, but with others as well, it's such a kind of overwhelming mental presence in our minds that it's very easy to work everything into that kind of framework and say, oh, it must be about this, even if it isn't.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Because to quote the zombie writer Max Brooks from World War Z, like in an interview, he was talking about how zombies are kind of like a metaphor for pandemics, and these types of bird flus and other crises. So this is, zombies and horror are a good way to kind of generate the conversation. but I don't think he, perhaps when he said that quote, he didn't see that a pandemic would kind of come along like this, or would recycle from 100 years ago as well. But yeah, the zombies in the book and in general pop culture and media kind of become the larger metaphor for the things that we don't want to talk about, or which is now in the forefront, because just before this conversation started, we were talking about mask mandates and things like that, and
Totally.
and people that are resisting science.
Precisely. Yeah, no, I was thinking of that very example of the way that zombies can really do a lot of things. They're really a useful kind of cultural device to have around for many reasons. Thinking about, for example, the George A. Romero movies, where the kind of zombie crisis can be the kind of social and racial tensions of the late 60s, or it can be consumerism in the 70s. It can kind of serve the purposes that you need it to serve. Was that kind of something that you were taking into account as you were writing Handyman's Guide? This idea that the zombie could kind of fill these different roles as it was needed?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always considered zombies one of my favorites, because they're like, the same way that like hybrid like genres are flexible and in form. Zombies, I think, are like a flexible monster, because they intersect with vampires, they intersect with Frankenstein, they intersect, so there's a lot of intersections there, and they do allow to be vehicles for these larger cultural issues we want to talk about. And I think you covered Romero quite well, where we kind of talk about race, especially what happens at the end of Night of the Living Dead with the with the bold act of having a black protagonist in the 60s in a piece, in a movie like that, and how it kind of became a reflection of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and others. Yeah, and also I also used the Handyman. I also used the zombies as kind of like a personal vehicle for for like failed relationships, grief, and so forth as well. So that's kind of like another layer where you kind of use horror, personal horror, to kind of connect with others, and
yeah.
then there's that dark connection of environmental catastrophe we're kind of seeing unfold as well.
Sure. No, that's really something that I love about the collection. The way that the zombie that you would often see as a symbol of this kind of social horror, the kind of widespread horror, or social tensions or phenomena in general. In this book, the zombie becomes something on a much smaller, more intimate scale, where it's really about like you say, about a sentimental relationship, for example, or grief, or very kind of personal kind of human feelings. And I think that it's very interesting, as you say, to think about this as genre kind of genre writing, because obviously when we think about genre, we tend to think about fiction for the most part, right? Horror fiction, zombie fiction, obviously is a huge genre to itself. But we don't tend to think of genre poetry in quite the same way, perhaps, or certainly not of horror poetry. So how do you feel about that? Do you see this as being a case of using genre in your writing? Is that something that you were conscious of as you prepared the collection?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should lean into it, because it leads to accessibility. It keeps people guessing, and it leads to good challenges, because a lot of times, I think we've grown up in a creative writing educational environment where it's kind of, in past years they kind of said, realism, and we shouldn't be looking at the genres, and I think we have to kind of push back and say, you can write genre, but you just have to, you just kind of use the techniques, the influences, and everything else to do it well and effectively, and especially connect it, more closely with our cultural connections and roots, because I think those aspects are important for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's very fascinating to see that happening in poetry, and to see that poetry can carry both the kind of load of sentiment and kind of personal feeling, while at the same time totally fitting in with the kind of more practical, I guess you could say, requirements of a genre. It can have the different things at the same time. One poem that I liked a lot, and perhaps you could read a couple for us if you wouldn't mind, but one that I enjoyed is called "My Love for You." And something that I liked about it very much is that it certainly is one of the book's zombie poems, if you will. But I'm very much a title nerd. I always like the titles of things. And I like that you wouldn't guess from the title necessarily the content or the genre of the poem. Perhaps you could read it if you have it on hand.
Yeah,
if you wouldn't mind.
I'd be delighted to read it. And
Sure.
I guess a little background on this one is I wrote this with my students during a writing exercise. So we were kind of doing these postcard poems, and so I wanted to write a postcard poem.
Mm-hmm.
My love for you. My love for you is a zombie's arm, smashing through the splintered door, flailing and grabbing to find you. It is tired from slamming against walls, but it will never give up until nothing stands between us. If you lop it off, be gentle enough to take out the rest of me.
Hey, excellent. Yeah, I like that one a lot.
Thanks.
I really appreciate about the language of this collection in general, that there is such a lot of physicality to the writing. A lot of descriptions of physical actions. Obviously, the other kind of main motif running through the book, besides the zombie apocalypse, is kind of DIY home improvement, both of which terrify me in almost equal measure. So I thought that was a fantastic combination. And the way that you, again, use language like lop, slam, grab, etc. in such a romantic and kind of heartfelt poem is something that I think is quite remarkable. Did you? I'm interested to know whether those two themes or kind of through lines, which very much become intertwined in the collection, was that a conscious decision from the start, or was this something that came up more organically as the collection came to be?
When I was writing my second book, The Siren World, I originally had a draft of it that was that kept getting rejected or kept being like a runner-up or an honorable mention for different contests, and there was about 40 or 50 pages of like Inca poems about the Incan Empire and colonialism in Spain and things like that. And they just, like a lot of the feedback I kept getting was it wasn't personal enough. It was just kind of reenactments of history, and they're like, they're good, but and so I made a very tough, I cut like 35 pages of that manuscript. So suddenly I was panicking, and then with The Siren World, I had a bunch of Ecuador poems kind of connected to my mother's heritage, and then a bunch of Puerto Rico poems connecting to my father's heritage. And then I just kind of said, what if I found them together? And that kind of lesson in that manuscript organizational process allowed me to kind of feel brave enough or open to taking home improvement in zombie poetries and kind of unifying them. And also there was also this kind of pragmatic moment of, well, a lot of these tools you use for home improvement projects will actually kind of come in handy, because when I was originally like shopping for a house, I was kind of like looking at fortifications or, you could destroy this staircase and these windows are high enough so the zombies can't smash them and things like that. But basically, another way that these poems all connect is I'm treating them like process poems. So these are kind of like survival poems, like kind of like there's some apocalyptic prepping kind of research that kind of went into the survival process. And if you look at like the poem about wallpaper or popcorn ceilings or whatever,
Mhm.
You could, I've done all these projects, so you could kind of follow the poems to hopefully do these home improvement projects.
I was interested to know about that too. If there was it feels very much like there is at least one, if not a number of real life DIY projects going on in the background of whoever's writing these poems. So I was
Absolutely.
interested to know if that was true or not. Yeah, as you say, I think that there's a strong connection between the poems that have to do with putting together or breaking apart houses, kind of juxtaposed with these often extremely violent poems. I mean, very kind of gory descriptions of fighting zombies and all this kind of thing. And as you say, it reminds me a lot of a great book. I'm afraid I won't be able to remember the author's name, but as a kid, I loved it. The Zombie Survival Guide, with the instructions, as you say, for how to fortify your house and which type of power tool is most effective for fighting a zombie.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's Max Brooks as well.
Max Brooks, precisely. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps you'd like to read a house-oriented poem, perhaps one of the ones you mentioned. I very much enjoyed the recurrence of the popcorn ceiling throughout the book in a number of places. But I'll
Sure.
perhaps leave the choice up to you. But is there anyone in particular that you enjoy sharing there?
Oh no, I'd be happy to read the popcorn ceiling poem. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes if I'm feeling goofy at a poetry reading, I'll just kind of say, imagine you're in you're in Lowe's or your local hardware store, kind of working on a project. What project are you working on? And then someone will call out a project that does not appear in the book. So it's kind of this joke kind of always backfires on me. But yeah. Yeah, this one's called Scraping the Popcorn Ceiling. And if you like popcorn ceilings, sorry, I'm gonna talk trash. So forgive those who sprayed the ceilings, for they did not know what they did. Back in the nave of your home, stand on your ladder, spray, then scrape with the angle that will not stab through drywall. Mud over it later. Hope it will cover imperfect trowel strokes, baptizing it thick with primer paint and a new color to worship daily. Fight the dust that sneaks upstairs, under rugs, and into beds until it cakes to your tired body. Accept the powder leaking inside your goggles and mouth as communion with the ceiling, the burning in your neck and arms as penance for the sins of the original homeowner. There are no holy relics here. Be humbled by mud and paint splotches on your shoes in tribute to the ceiling you will never admit, reminds you of a cathedral made of a full week's work.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Yeah, I love these pieces that kind of tell a story of such emotion, I suppose, or of such importance through things that seem trivial, perhaps, or through this very practical, well, handy language, right? I very much like the line "penance for the sins of the original homeowner." Homeowner being a term so much of kind of real estate or of home improvement intermixed with this kind of religious language. And something that we see throughout the collection that I liked a lot is like I say, the sense of importance in these kind of ostensibly small or practical things, like a wall, a floor, an appliance. I've also very much enjoyed the poem about the death of an appliance, was one that resonated quite a lot with me. So I wonder, I mean, is that something that you kind of were writing in as you were kind of undertaking projects of this kind? Was it kind of like you had the experience of an appliance dying and that kind of came to mind? Or was it a bit more programmatic in that you set about saying kind of, I'm gonna come up with kind of home improvement projects and then write poems around them? What was the order of it?
I love that. So a lot of these poems were reactions to poems that or to projects that I was that I've done over the years. And um because the clear connection between writing and home projects is persistence, that kind of failure, and then
Mhm.
you kind of get it, and then the next time you improve on it, and then hopefully the elements stay intact. But another thing I've kind of reflected upon is that a lot of times a home improvement project is kind of being done so you don't notice it. For example, like you fix a toilet so it works. You don't sit there and admire the toilets. This in and like with the popcorn ceilings, you're getting rid of it, and you don't have your friends come over and say like, really love this ceiling. It's an inspiring ceiling, or something like that. So there's this theme of invisibility, and I think that can kind of extend further to a lot of people that come from working backgrounds where they're, a lot of their labor and hard work is not acknowledged. And I since then, my partner and I, we've moved to a farm, so we have like an acre and a half. So we're taking on different projects, and we're getting humbled in different ways. And there, I think there continues to be something valued and important and sacred about, working with your hands and not losing touch with that, even in situations where your privilege does, can pull you away from that work.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a fantastic point about the kind of invisibility of these types of labor, or the goal of them even being invisible. Certainly in translation, that's something that we talk about all the time, right? Is that the idea with your work is to kind of end up creating something where it's not apparent that you really did anything. I mean, often the compliment that one gets is that, oh, this sounds like it's not even a translation, you know what I mean? So definitely I see the resonance there. And also, as you say, in the kind of, I like that these poems put a spotlight on the action of doing this kind of work, and really make it seem important and kind of prominent in the mind, when so often these things are ignored. Something as an interpreter, an experience I've had many times working with people who do landscaping or construction or things like that, is realizing how often guys like that will have on their phones a ton of pictures of the work they've done, and will be happy to show you, like, hey, check out this work I did in someone's yard the other day, or like, look at this thing that we did. And when you kind of see it being shown to you like that by the person who did the work, you're struck by kind of, oh my God, that's amazing. What a kind of incredible project that you did. And how did you kind of manage to pull this together? When in the kind of normal mindset moving through life, we're kind of trained to not see any of that. We're trained to see it as background. So
Great.
Fascinating to put the spotlight on that, I think.
Yeah. And I've had those conversations with my plumber friend and stuff, my plumber and stuff like that, where we're just kind of having and then he's just like, oh, get a load of this. And then we look at the pictures and of like, him setting up the boiler and things like that. Because, to kind of circle back to what we're talking about with Zoom and technology as well, and the apocalyptic ramifications, working with your hands allows you to also to preserve this knowledge in some ways. So I'm hoping that these poems also kind of working with your hands kind of evokes a memory, even if it is the grief of that time that you lost that appliance that really frustrated you,
Sure. Speaking of work that I think often goes a little bit unseen, and sometimes even deliberately, something that you and I have in common is that we are both editors of literary journals. I work on Latin American Literature Today, as I already mentioned, and you work on Pilgrimage magazine. Actually, if I may, just really quick piece of news that just came out today is that LALT was selected as a winner of a Whiting Literary Magazine prize from the Whiting Foundation. So that is in the back of my mind at the moment. I'm very happy about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
That's exciting news.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So yeah, that's work that I've been doing for several years now, about 5 years. And I understand that you've been working with Pilgrimage magazine for some time as well. And I think it's interesting that in both of our bios and in bios in general, if someone is an editor of a journal, let's say, often that comes at the end of their list of titles, doesn't it? You often will hear so-and-so is a poet, novelist, translator, and editor of X journal, right? And I wonder sometimes why that is when I think that work is extremely important. I mean, but probably just as important as anything that goes on in the kind of literary world. So I don't know, maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience as editor at Pilgrimage and kind of how you came into that and how you see that work in alignment with your work as a writer, as a poet.
I'm still really stumped by your question about the part where it's like, why does it come at the end? I'm gonna have to think about that portion of it, because you're right. If it weren't for the publishers and the editors doing this important work behind the scenes, a lot of the authors being showcased in in so many venues would not be able to reach out to people and connect. And I think that also kind of goes double during the pandemic, because you saw a lot of literary magazines and publishers kind of lose a lot of revenue. And in this case, it's not like profit. It's kind of just to keep the doors open. So there's a lot of creative innovation and things like that. And the term that I always connect to it is literary citizenship. And I first heard that term from Wayne Miller from Copper Nickel, and he's a phenomenal poet in his own right. But he kind of, and so when we talk about this idea of literary citizenship, it's that idea of how can we give back while also, kind of behind the scenes. And I really do believe in that. So I think it's such an important aspect. And when, because I also teach the student literary magazine here, and it's called Tempered Steel. And when that happens, I'm teaching them to kind of, that this work can lead to employment and but it also leads to just great ways to give back. And people don't always kind of think about that in that respect. So but fortunately in the writing world, whether it's on Twitter or not, I think a lot of times people kind of champion the literary magazines that are reshaping the cultural landscape as well, because like a lot of people in the last few years kind of cite like, well, like anti-racism and other elements have kind of came out of nowhere. But if you kind of look at editors and publishers and such, such as yourself, that work has been that work has been happening for a long time. So it's kind of, it's in some ways it's kind of like the rest of other areas of society are just catching up to that aspect of it. And hopefully it's leading to more writers of color and diverse backgrounds to getting more of the visibility they deserve.
Certainly.
So
yeah, absolutely. I think that it's a tremendous responsibility, and I'm sure that you feel the same way with Pilgrimage, and especially working with students, to be the kind of curator of other people's work in that way, and to be the person or one of the people who is selecting what goes and what doesn't, right? And kind of making those decisions that, as you say, can ultimately, I think, have a very profound effect on the kind of cultural conversation on a huge scale now that we're able to distribute electronically internationally. So no, I think that I see the translation and the editing work as being kind of two sides of the same coin, probably, when it comes to sharing other people's work, but also something that never stops being a little bit scary. I think that level of responsibility for kind of having some small part in steering the conversation around those kinds of work.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, because in pilgrimage, I think about 2 years ago we started incorporating like a small translation folio in the back,
Mhm.
and it helps it helps people discover, it helps readers discover writers they wouldn't know otherwise, because
Mhm.
there's so many writers beyond the U.S. borders that are doing such important work that is altering the literary landscape.
Certainly, yeah, no, that's of course one of our major goals with LALT is to try to create this entirely kind of multilingual space, kind of bilingual at a minimum, where translation is kind of seen not as a necessity, but as a kind of key literary part of the work itself. You know what I mean? Not something that kind of
Absolutely.
has to be done for the sake of understanding, but rather as another step in the kind of literary journey of a particular piece of writing. So
Yeah, it's
yeah,
important.
absolutely. Something else that you and I have in common is that we've both participated in fellowships over the course of our careers. As Tim
Yeah.
mentioned, I'm currently on the Tulsa Artist Fellowship, for which I'm extremely grateful and very happy to be here. And he mentioned that you have been a Canto Mundo Fellow, I'm a Kondo Fellow. And reading your book, I noticed that there's a poem dedicated to Norma Cantu, who I understand was is the founder of Canto Mundo. And it was a fantastic poem, Nuestra Curandera. I'd love for you to read it if you'd like to, and perhaps talk a little bit about what that relationship means to you and your experience with those fellowships.
Yeah, I would be delighted. Norma is a phenomenal writer and a mentor to so many of us. I'll just say us, like with Chicanx, Latinx, and all kinds of other writers beyond that, where and if and when you do have an opportunity to meet her or to hear her speak, she just has such a strong, inspiring energy. And I'm trying to look for the poem
I sneakily have the Kindle edition open right next to our faces at this very moment. So that is one plus to the Zoom readings, is that you can navigate very effectively to whichever poem you need.
But no, I'll find it in just a second. But no, when because I was fortunate to participate in fellowships like Canto Mundo, Mokondo, and because a lot of times in when you're in your day-to-day community, you kind of feel, you don't always feel connected to other writers that are kind of doing similar things, whether it's exploring your cultural background, because in a lot of creative writing workshops, people are just kind of like, oh, it's another poem about Ecuador, it's another poem about Puerto Rico, is this one in Vietnam this time, Juan, and things like that. So
right.
So it felt good to go to a community and kind of do that in kind of a place where all the work could be nurtured. And there it is. I knew it would just show up like right then. So this poem took this a little background on this poem. It took place at a Canto Mundo. There was like a celebration going on, and Norma's like, I was going through some personal stuff in my life, and she just kind of pulled me into another room, and then the poem happens.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Nuestra Curandera for Norma Cantu. In Austin, on crutches with an ankle sprain, I struggled through city and airport with the clicking slow gait. The poets prayed over me in a dark lounge with the party murmuring next door. She placed her hands on the bruised swell. It hurt when she told me this was an old wound from a past older than me. I understood how this cost me a past life and how it balled up my present pains, maybe snapped during a murderous chase or tangled in the chains and ropes of a sinking ship. I wanted to free my ankle immediately and take brave steps, but grating bones and cartilage told me to walk through the lingering limp and let it heal.
Excellent.
Thanks.
I love that one. I think it's very good. I love the physicality of it, and all through the collection, I think that's you do a fantastic job with that. It kind of
Thank you.
hurts. You know, I mean, it hurts to hear even because you do such a good job evoking that. And
Thanks.
I agree totally about what you were saying about the need for those sorts of communities for people who do this kind of work, and for there to be a kind of deliberate effort around providing those sorts of spaces, because I think that without them, so many people who would otherwise be interested in poetry, say, or translation, or any kind of art or creative activity can kind of be lost, right?
Yeah.
If that is not something that kind of surrounds people in their particular context.
Well, can I flip it? Can I flip this on you? Can you tell us more about the fellowship you're currently doing? And do you have any work that you're working on available to read for us?
Yeah, I didn't even think about reading something of mine, but I could probably grab a book.
You really should.
If needs were. Yeah, I could find something. But I'm on the Tulsa Artist Fellowship. I was just saying to Tim before we started that I started the fellowship in 2020, August 2020. So it's been kind of uniquely in COVID times throughout the time I've been on it, which has made some changes to the programming, of course, that the fellowship offers. But it's a program of the George Kaiser Family Foundation, which is a nonprofit that sponsors a great deal of community programming and work here in Tulsa. And it started in 2015, if I'm not mistaken, initially as a program for visual artists, and later came to include literary artists as well. Now there are about 50 people, if I'm not mistaken, in residence here in Tulsa, some of whom are local, some of whom are from all over the US. So it is a large and I think very important contingent of artists and art workers that we have here in Tulsa. A very diverse group in terms of discipline and practice. There are visual artists, multidisciplinary folks, a really strong literary contingent, and increasingly a large group of translators as well. Tulsa, Oklahoma, one of the many things that one might not think about Tulsa, but that is actually true, is that Tulsa is really becoming kind of a center for literary translation in the United States. So that's another reason why I'm so pleased to be a part of the fellowship. It's also fantastically generous. It has the goal of kind of allowing arts practitioners the time and space to create in the fellowship's own language, which is something that, of course, we so often lack. And perhaps especially for people who practice literary arts, there is often the strong attachment with the academy, which can, of course, sometimes be a great thing, but can also mean in some cases that one is perhaps doesn't have as much time to focus specifically on the kind of creative side of one's practice as much as you'd like to. In the case of translation, that's certainly sometimes the case. But so I on the fellowship, I edit Latin American literature today, which would have been a difficult thing to keep doing without this kind of support, because, as you know, literary journals don't tend to be things that earn you a huge amount of money. So in that sense, that has been integral. And I've also done other translation work besides. And a big part of my work also has been community interpreting around Tulsa, which I do through an agency here in Tulsa that is the people who kind of put me in touch with those who need me, with clients. But that has been a fantastically rewarding part of the work as well. And I try to see that as a part of my art practice too. You know, I think that people often see the in-person interpreting as something purely practical or again, as a kind of necessity rather than something that can be artistic and creative. But I think it certainly is artistic and creative as much as literary translation is. Here, my partner has just very kindly brought me a book I translated. If you'd like me to attempt to find a poem, perhaps I could. This is Intensive Care by dear friend of mine and a professor who is actually currently at OU, Arturo Gutierrez Plaza, a Venezuelan poet. Let me see if I can think here about a poem that would be particularly appropriate for the situation.
Oh, I'd love to hear a poem. Yeah.
Sure. This book has a kind of a through line running through it. We were talking about the kind of DIY and the and zombies in the case of your book. This book has a strong kind of medical theme running through it. The title is Intensive Care, Cuidados Intensivos in Spanish, and that's something that that kind of comes up a lot, and that forms an observation, I would say, not just on health itself, but also on poetry, kind of how to deal with poetry and the care that needs to be taken with it. Perhaps I could read the title poem. That would probably make sense. Just flip to it here. Yeah, I'll do this one with your permission. This is called Intensive Care, Cuidados Intensivos by Arturo Gutierrez Plaza, and I'll read it in English. My siblings don't read poetry. My parents didn't either. By dictate of the present day, my children strengthen this tradition now familiar at school. Nonetheless, all chains grow loose sooner or later at their weakest link. And then poetry lays us bare. It sarcastically reveals a fatal ailment. Words also convalesce under everyday wonder. If there is commiseration, the pity is cut short. But if the matter is prolonged, if the malady stretches further, for your own good and your people's peace, seek out other extreme unctions. Admit the poem to intensive care.
Beautiful. Thank you. That's so great.
Thank you. This collection came out shortly after I started the fellowship, and I've been lucky enough to have the chance to finish another verse collection by the same poet while participating in the fellowship. So it, as I say, the generosity there really means a lot and can totally change your career. I mean, I'm sure that you found that was your experience too with fellowships, but I definitely think I am a different kind of a different translator, a different editor after or currently having the fellowship than I was before. So
yeah, that's exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of translation of language, something that you touched on briefly earlier and that I'd like to ask about a little bit is the place of Spanish in your poems. In the Handyman's Guide, this is something that comes up kind of from time to time, and there's one poem in particular that I really enjoyed that ties in with this too, in fact, that I kind of struck me quite a lot. One is called Ecuadorian Couplets, which is a poem talking about experiences in Ecuador, which you described very beautifully, I thought, as a place we couldn't translate, which I think says a lot about language and place and to what extent you can perhaps separate or not separate the two. And another that I liked a great deal called To Dream in Spanish, which talks about your own kind of relationship with the Spanish language. Perhaps you could read one or the other or both, whichever you fancy, and we could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to read those two poems. And I guess the way that the background I would add is I grew up in a Spanish speaking household, but my parents made the decision to not teach me Spanish, and so I've been learning as an adult, and during the reading last week, I made a joke about my Duolingo streak, which continues, and it goes well, because like the conversations with my mother have shifted to kind of like fully in Spanish, and she's correcting me and all kinds of stuff. So it's been it's very rewarding. It's a very rewarding struggle. And And then when I was in grad school, there was a moment where someone thought, wasn't thinking about it and said something like, oh, you should have a Spanish word here for flavor. And I was very offended by that kind of statement, but I did understand rhythmically what they were kind of saying. And but since I grew up in a household where I heard Spanish regularly, the language kind of connects, and I just want to get a stronger mastery of Spanish because it's beautiful and fun. And then the Ecuadorian couplets, this was like the last time we were able to visit Ecuador. Hopefully that is resolved soon. And I'll talk about the other one next. Ecuadorian couplets. In times of crisis, on the road with a busted car, in the terminal with 8-hour layovers, and in a place we couldn't translate, we kept our spirits up with our smiled mantra, aventuras. When the tide recedes at dusk, we walk past children playing tag, all the way to the sunset and back past our footprints in thousands of sand dollars burying themselves, pausing to kiss and admire hungry waves. Driving on Dramamine and coping with the zigzag mountain roads, we sleep to accelerate arrival. We survive, the town full of 3-wheeled taxis and the main street closed for a soccer tourney. The village where we bought pan de yuca, the procession carrying their saint along the road's shoulder, and the stabbing Andes all around us. On the road outside Baños, after hiking the maze of bridges and waterfalls, we stop on the shoulder to watch Tungurahua erupt, billows of smoke darker than the sky. We let it steal our breath when fire and lava awakens what we will never see again. We drank agua loca on our last night. My cousins mixed jugo de mora straight into the bottle. We passed it in a circle, taking big swigs, the fire down the throat until the bottle was drained. They told you, you are one of us now. Thanks.
That's great.
So the next poem, To Dream in Spanish, I had the fortunate experience of with some colleagues at Colorado College. We used to go to the El Paso County Jail and teach ICE detainees creative writing, and it was similar to what you're talking about, the work that you do, Arthur. It was extremely rewarding and inspiring. And this was before I was pretty good at Spanish, so we did a lot of it, like kind of picking up the Spanish English dictionary and going back and forth, And then some inmates would kind of mess with us and kind of say, we, after working with them for 5 or 6 weeks, they're like, we speak English, we just didn't know if we could trust you, and understandably so, And I'm going to read you a joke haiku very quickly and then read this poem. But my colleague at Colorado College, Stephen Hayward, he swears this happened, but we still have a disagreement about it. So he wrote a haiku. So I'm going to read a Stephen Hayward haiku. And it goes like this. And it's called Haiku Written Upon the Occasion of Walking into Echo Ward at Colorado Springs Jail to teach a class with the poet Juan Morales, who wears Stetson, in late November 2011. Damn, that man smells fine, I hear, as we walk into Echo. Still got it, Juan tells me.
Very good.
Anyway, so To Dream in Spanish. Practice as an adult with phone calls to mama y papa. Volunteer to teach ICE detainees in jail every Tuesday. You finally take trips to the motherland and the fatherland as a tourist, ironically surrounded by family. Describe your life back in America with sentences as simple as charades laced with off-target syntax and cognates. Give yourself credit when people ask if you speak it. Don't worry about your white boy accent. Say yes instead of the long answer about not being raised on Spanish and how you heard your parents talking it like secrets. It's okay to fry your brain code switching each day in a country that is not yours. You won't catch every phrase. Let go. Fall into the dreams in sueños, heavy as rivers overflowing with accents and tildes when you forget you don't speak Spanish only for the night.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Certainly one of my favorites from the collection. I love the fact that those two are in sequence too. And I really like the sense of kind of initiation that comes with these two. Initiation in a language or in a culture in general. In the Ecuadorian couplets, again, there's language that has to do with struggle to some extent, right? Coping, you survive the experience, right? I really like the stabbing Andes as well. There's a sense of this kind of aggression to it, right? That one has to come through in order to reach this point at the end where the speaker is kind of accepted. And is that kind of how you have seen that experience as a sense of initiation, as you say, learning Spanish, working on it as an adult in that sense? I don't speak Spanish as a first language, and while learning it, I remember thinking of it quite a lot as kind of a second childhood with a new language, where you felt like you were kind of put back in this place where you're kind of struggling through understanding again in a way that can sometimes be quite uncomfortable. So do you see that as a kind of experience of initiation in a way?
Yeah, absolutely. I was very insecure about not speaking Spanish for a long time, and then eventually I kind of, there was like this kind of internal struggle where it's just like, well, why don't you learn, And so that became like a tough and difficult process, because I've written other poems and about other memories when I first traveled to visit family in Puerto Rico and Ecuador and other places where I'm a very extroverted person that likes to talk. And once that ability is removed, it's very frustrating. It's a very frustrating process. And so, but in the process of that, just like good poetry, it teaches you about the importance of listening, and kind of acquiring. So that's kind of been a great thing that's kind of happened with that.
Mm-hmm.
And things like the stabbing Andes and things like that, I think of the Andes in South America as kind of another place that's overlooked for its beauty, its geography and complexities. And because I still have like a fond memory on that same trip when this was the first that poem was about the first time like my partner went to Ecuador with my family. There's a lot of like nervousness about traveling with family and how stressful it is, and but it turned out to be like a nice adventure with struggle. There's a lot of beautiful memories mixed into it. And I think the acquisition or learning a new language or mastering a language kind of has those same energies.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, I think so. On a perhaps kind of ending note, I'd like to talk a little bit more about your work, as you said, with ICE detainees. Working with incarcerated folks has been a part of what I have done here in Tulsa as an interpreter. I haven't kind of done teaching in that way, but have had a bit of a window into that world as an interpreter. And it has changed quite a lot how I work as a translator, I would say, in that it gives you this kind of, on the one hand, in a practical sense, because you're kind of translating off the top of your head, it's a lot faster, it's a lot more immediate. The person's right there instead of the author having written something and then you translating it later. But also in the sense of seeing, I guess, how much importance is assigned to different people or different people's stories. You know what I mean? How different it is working, for example, on translating a relatively long fictional novel versus translating kind of, say, pre-sentence interviews with incarcerated folks, where the question is kind of like, how was your childhood? Good. Okay, move on to the next question. You know what I mean? So I think that it really puts in context how much we yeah, how much we do or don't kind of care about the stories that are in front of us. Have you found that that work has changed at all your approach to poetry, to writing, to your practice in any way in terms of your own work?
Yeah, it continues to remind us about the humanizing element that comes with words, you know, and the power and urgency of words too, because, and that's why I really applaud the type of translation work that you and other folks are doing, because there are lives at stake. There are important outcomes at stake as well. And, you know, in a world where, you know, social media fights kind of dictate everything, I think literature is you know, continues to be like a way we fall back and to kind of sort out how we can kind of bridge these disagreements and hopefully kind of remind ourselves that these people, there are humans being incarcerated, that you know, people breaking ridiculous border crossing laws and things like that are human beings, and we should not deprive them of humanity, you know.
For sure. If I think perhaps we could go ahead and start wrapping up. Would it be okay if I asked you to read one more poem before we end?
I'd be delighted. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. And the one that I had in mind, this is obviously up to you if you'd rather pick a different one, but is one that has to do with precisely what we're talking about. And perhaps we could, as I say, close with this. This is one that I enjoyed a great deal, that has to do with language translation with these exact situations. And it's called Perfume. And I believe dedicated to the very person you were just mentioning, if I'm not mistaken.
I was about to read. I was going to offer to read this before with one of the other questions. Because this, when this work that I did with Steve Hayward and other folks from Colorado College, it was extremely rewarding work. It was stressful and terrifying, but it all, you know, it kind of helped me reverse a lot of, you know, it reminded me of the humanity that we have for people and how people are so misunderstood. And it reminds me of colleagues that are here at CSU, Colorado State University Pueblo. In our sociology department, I have two friends that teach this class called Webs of Support. So they teach they take CSU Pueblo students to the I'm sorry, I'm getting mixed up between prison and jail. It's a jail. Or no, it's a prison. So they go to this women's facility and they teach classes there. So the inmates and the student and the CSU Pueblo students are side by side taking classes for credit. And you can imagine all the work behind the scenes that goes into getting these classes approved and having incarcerated individuals come out of there with college credits. I think it's that work is, I'm in awe of the work that people are doing like that. So, and this is a poem that kind of addresses that, that kind of work and my opportunity to help out. Perfume, for Steve Hayward. When the inmate answers with perfume, I assume he misses the beauty of a specific woman he lost, bathed in her subtle scent, a delicate droplet. I translated wrong, but he is patient to point out the correct word in the Spanish-English dictionary. Not perfume, cologne. We negotiate the mislaid words between us. We write in the D Block lounge about how he misses the bottles of cologne that lined his bathroom window, how he shaved and then smiled in the struggle to pick the right essence for the day. He's soft-spoken, but tells me the inside is absent of smell. He would accept the bad ones over nothing. When we finish our session, he returns to his cell, and I am left with a spare poem by an accused killer, charges that hang over me like a mist. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I love this. I love the fact that a mistake in translation, or a mistake between air quotes, can lead to a wonderful finished product like this. That's one of the great things about translation, I think, and one of the great things about poetry. And
absolutely.
with that, I think I'll go ahead and close this out. I want to once again extend a warm thanks to Juan J. Morales. It's been fantastic meeting you, talking to you. I look forward to when you can come and visit us here in Oklahoma in person. And also to thank Tim Bradford and the Mark Allen Everett Poetry Series for the fantastic work that you all do. I'm not sure if Tim wants to close out with any final words, but that will be all from me. And thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for everything, Arthur. I appreciate your beautiful questions, your beautiful translations, and this chance to collaborate. And look forward to finding more ways to support the journal.
Thank you very much.